On the first day of Takesmas, my Ben Brode sent to me. The snap and retreat mechanic is the worst part of the game. See High Voltage. I think I generally disagree with this just based on the amount of other card games I've been trying out recently where I've been like, man, I really wish I could snap. But I do think that the snap and retreat mechanic does a lot to push Marvel Snap out of the traditional card game mold. And I think if you're looking for a more traditional card game experience, you might feel like the snap and retreat mechanic isn't really all that good. But what Snap and Retreat does is explicitly allow for bad decks with explosive wins to exist in this game in a way they simply can't in other games. It's like a jank booster. If you have like a bad combo deck that doesn't really work, in every other game, it's garbage. But in Marvel Snap, you can capitalize on when it does work. And I think that a big part of this game's longevity is actually that this allows more decks to be viable at any given time because there are decks with different sort of cube equity profiles. And these decks with bad cube equity profiles in every other game are hard unplayable, but in Marvel Snap are actually kind of playable. Snap content creators could do everyone a favor and be more vocal about the most efficient way to play Proving Grounds. Both player snaps, loser concedes. I've been pretty vocal about this, but I'll do it just in case. Yeah, you should do this if you're playing Proving Grounds. The best way to think about this is that you are taking money out of the greedy game developers' coffers when you do this. They only have Proving Grounds exist as a method of charging money for the higher ranks of Conquest. You should do your best to make sure that you never pay that tax and that others don't have to pay that tax as well. Collective action gets the goods. Make sure we distribute those silver tickets far and wide. More Series 1 cards need to be buffed. I think in the abstract, this is one of those things that everyone can basically 100% agree with. Everyone thinks this is a thing that should happen for budget reasons or for, balance reasons, whatever the reason you think. This is like one of the most commonly held opinions to the point that I'm not even really sure it's a hot take. What I'm going to do is offer my hot take in response that doing this is way harder than you think. When you actually go through Series 1 cards, it is not easy to come up with easy buffs for a lot of them. And when you do, they often end up kind of hacky. Like, okay, let's add a point of power to White Tiger. Well, that doesn't do anything. Like, what people are asking for out of Series 1 cards is they want their Series 1 cards to be viable later into the game, like at endgame, right? And I'm not sure how realistic it is to have a bunch of cards from Series 1 be viable at endgame, because then those cards in Series 1 massively outshine their competitors, right? You can add points to stuff like White Tiger, but it won't alleviate what these people actually are asking for. Like, White Tiger being a 2-power card won't make it endgame viable the way something like Claw did, right? I'm sure there's a number you could do, but that number would then make White Tiger oppressive at the Series 1 gameplay range. And I think that's kind of the problem. I do think that it would be very nice if there were more Series 1 cards that scaled upwards, but there aren't a lot of designs that seem built for that, right? Like, there's some limited design space based on the tools that you get in Series 2 and Series 3 and Series 4 and Series 5 that, I'm leaving that in, that allow you to, in certain ways, not necessarily be able to buff these cards. And I think that something like Claw is a lot safer to buff than White Tiger. We saw that, right? And the reason for that is that a lot of the synergies that double up Claw, they exist in Series 1, so it already exists in that context. But like any on-reveal card exists in a world without Wong, right? And so it has to be A, good enough to stand on its own, but B, also not broken when Wong comes back. And so there's this weird dynamic that I think makes it a lot harder for them to buff these early Series 1 cards because of them being in Series 1 and valuing the Series 1 play experience. Agent Venom perpetuated a boring and uninspiring meta, has very few balance levers, and will inevitably go from being astronomically good to piss-poor unplayable if directly nerfed. Any nerf will first be to cards he supports rather than AV himself, just as happened with Arishem. I don't begrudge people thinking this, but I do think it's not really something that's sort of backed up by reality. Like, when we talk about good season pass cards that went from really, really good to really, really bad immediately, it's actually kind of hard to come up with examples. Like, they kind of killed Elsa, who was better than Agent Venom, but then they brought her back. They did their best to deal with Arishem, but Arishem's still a playable deck. Like, it's still a good enough thing to do. Like, it's not like it, like, got obliterated off the face of the earth and became piss-poor unplayable. I actually think they mostly do a pretty good job of making things not piss-poor unplayable, and I think the issue here is that what happens is people buy a card expecting it to be the best card in the game, and when they balance it to be not the best card in the game, then they start calling it piss-poor unplayable. And I think that that's actually, like, I think that you could have a reasonable conversation about the Marvel Snap dev team being willing to pump power into cards and then fix it later and aiming high, and what it means when you consistently aim high and have to fix it later, and whether that equates to, like, purposefully releasing these cards a little too strong. I think there's a reasonable conversation there. What I don't think there's a reasonable conversation about is they made these cards piss-poor unplayable, because I just don't think they have the track record of doing that. Current competitive players will never be challenged because no one new can compete unless they've been playing for at least a year. To me, this is the #1 barrier to Marvel Snap having a competitive scene. And I've been talking about this for a while, and I'm glad someone else brought this up finally, because the fact is that it's very difficult for Marvel Snap content creators, Marvel Snap competitors, anything, for a new player to break into the scene. This is part of why I go out of my way to use my platform to promote those players when they show up. And I'm not going to, like, take full credit, or really any credit for any of these players. What I will do is use them as an example of people who I have gone out of my way to try to promote and give credit to. Woody and Husky and Lambie, like, these are all people who are incredible and I'd like to think would have succeeded on their own. But it's still, I feel like, my responsibility to take these people and give them a bigger platform when I can, because otherwise it becomes even more crushingly hard for anyone new to ever break into the scene. When you look at the top Marvel Snap streamers, it's not a coincidence that they're the people who've been here the longest. They are the people who are the most invested, who already have all the stuff. It's very hard to make content when you don't have the stuff and you aren't willing to make the investment. And why would you be willing to make the investment if there's no one who's proved that you can do this? And so I think that my job, not my job, but like one of the responsibilities I feel is to do what I can to get eyes on people who deserve it. And I think that that is something that I wish more content creators took seriously. As rough as it is to play against Hela, I'd argue that on-reveal decks are worse. I don't want to sit there for 5 minutes while your Wong Mystique Hazmat Odin deletes all my cards. I get there's counters, but still. The thing about Hela is that there weren't really meaningful counters. Like, your Wong Mystique Hazmat Odin has a very obvious and meaningful counter. You play Eliath or Cosmo in the lane that the Wong is, you can clog up the Wong lane. There's like some very clear things you can do about that. Hela's issue is more that she has, like, this is actually a great example of like player perception, right? Hela's issue was always that there wasn't enough you could do about her, so you ended up in these gambling situations. I would much rather lose by 10 million when I lose, but have a shot at winning, than lose by 5 on every lane, guaranteed all the time, and lose all the time. Like, I think this is just a basic thing, but like, it doesn't matter how much you lost by, it matters that you lost. And so when you have these Wong decks that like, they do all this like, whoa, here's all my amazing stuff, like, okay, well, you should have left. Like, okay, well, you should have counterplayed that. And I think the frustration with Hela is that there wasn't always enough direct counterplay. And so when you say something like, I get there are counters, but still, I think you're missing the point. Like, yeah, it sucks when you lose, but it sucks every time you lose. That's what losing is. It's not supposed to feel good. And losing harder shouldn't impact you. Losing by 10 million shouldn't matter as long as you win by 3 the other 60% of the time. Like, if I would take, I think this is obvious, but maybe it's not. If I could win 60% of the time by 3 points and lose 40% of the time by 10 million, I'm coming out ahead. And so I don't really find matters of degree to be all that relevant. It's just, did you win or did you not? And it's ultimately, in my opinion, easier to figure out if you're going to win or lose against a telegraph deck like Wong than it ever was against Hela, because of the, not necessarily the random element to it, but because you couldn't actually know where they're going to play the Hela. You can't actually be like, oh, I'm going to Cosmo this lane, I'm going to Eliath this lane. the power output is completely several question marks. And so I think that this is a weird, not necessarily a weird opinion to have, but it's one that bears investigation in my opinion. Snap needs to go more of the TCG route and less of the gacha route to have any long-term success. More expansions, modes, ways to get cards, less bundles, passes, tracks, and things to spend all your money on. I have played a little bit of Pokemon Pocket, and here's what I'll tell you. I am addicted to opening packs. Why don't we have packs? Like, I gotta tell you, going from a game that has amazing gameplay and fairly mediocre collection systems into a game that has not as amazing gameplay, but really fun collection systems has been kind of crazy. Like, it's just been like, wait, oh my god, you can have fun getting cards? It's so different. And I feel like, basically, the booster pack has been a staple of card gaming for such a long time, for such a good reason. It's a cheap way of introducing people to the game. It's cheap, it's low investment, and people don't get mad when they don't open their good stuff, right? And I think when you look at Marvel Snap, you look at the Spotlight caches, what sucks about them is when they try to make them more like a booster pack, but charge you much more. Like, the level of investment a Spotlight cache should get you, like the amount it takes to get it, is much more than the amount it takes to get a booster pack. And so it's much harder when you get some garbage you don't want out of a Spotlight cache. Whereas when you get some garbage you don't want out of a booster pack, like, okay, whatever, it's not supposed to be good. And I think that dynamic is something Snap is really missing. Like, there were several comments in this comment section when I asked for submissions for the hot takes video regarding Pokemon Pocket. We're gonna get into a couple more of those, but fundamentally, what I came away from Pokemon Pocket feeling is, damn, I love booster packs. Why aren't we doing that? Snap needs to fix their catch-up mechanic ASAP. Engagement appears to be down because of Pokemon and the Bazaar. And if people who took breaks to focus on those other games come back feeling overwhelmed by how behind they are, Snap is at risk of losing them permanently. Yes, I've been banging this drum. We have two major competitors to Marvel Snap dropping right now. Both of them have differing appeals, and both of them are going to carve off differing sections of the player base, right? And when those people come back, they're going to look at a metagame, and they're going to see, damn, there's a card I don't have that's required to play this metagame. And that's a really bad spot to put them in. You don't want to ever give them an additional pain point upon coming back. And I don't know what they can do to deal with this on the time frame that they have, but frankly, I think they should have been working on this a month ago, right? Like, again, I have no real understanding of time frames here, but I think if they can, like, roll out an event of some kind, like a Christmas event, that would go a long way. Like, some sort of Christmas event to, like, acquire more cards would go a long way getting these people back in. I really do believe that. If you have less than half of Series 4 and 5, the fourth Spotlight should 100% be a new card. After that, give people something like a Cosmic Border, or a token for an instant split of any card, 1,000 tokens. I think that this is not actually asking for enough. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there are like twice as many cards in Series 5 as there are in Series 4, right? And the weights for whether you get a Series 4 or a Series 5 card out of that last slot in the caches are actually weighted towards Series 4. So there's a 66% chance that you get a Series 4 card out of that, and a 33% chance that you get a Series 5 card out of that. And I think that maybe made sense back when series drops were meaningful. But it doesn't make sense in this current context, because what it means is the overwhelmingly most likely thing to happen to anyone who is consistently opening Spotlight caches is they're going to finish Series 4, and then that spot in the cache will represent a 66% chance at 1,000 tokens. That's horrible. That's really bad. I think that they need to update that spot in the cache based on the fact that there are so many more cards in Series 5 than Series 4. In order to justify those ratios, the ratios of 66% Series 4 to 33% Series 5, I feel like there needs to be something in Series 4 that people actually want. And so what is overwhelmingly likely for most people to happen as they get further and further along in their collections is they will finish Series 4, and that spot in the cache will have an average expected value of very, very bad. And I think that is a fundamental problem, because it is not only that you are 66% to get that Series 4 duplicate that is 1,000 tokens. You can also, let's say you have half of Series 5 at this point. Okay, so now you're like, now that remaining third, you're actually only 1/6 to get a new card. I don't like that the math behind the scenes is bad. I think maybe they should just, get rid of those weights entirely. That way, at least it's a fair roll on a new card. At least it's like, okay, I have 50% of the cards I could get. At least I have an actual 50% chance now. Because now, you could very easily have 50% of Series 4 and 5, and that would mean complete Series 4 and then a smattering of Series 5 cards, and you would have only like a 16% chance of getting a new card out of that slot because of the way things are weighted. I think that is awful. I think that is really bad. At least remove those weights and allow people a fair roll at getting a new card. The dev and balance teams don't get the credit they deserve. They do a pretty damn good job. Here's the thing. I think they do get the credit they deserve. Like, I think almost every complaint about the dev and balance teams comes by virtue of the economy, right? When people talk about, oh, well, their balance strategy is wrong, it's always in the context of the economy. People wouldn't be so mad at things changing the way they do if they didn't invest resources in those things first with a certain level of expectation. Now, Glenn has talked about how the team likes to aim high, and I think that is probably the right business decision for them to make. I can't really see a genuine analysis leading to any other thing. You don't really want to release cards that suck, because if you release cards that suck, not only do people not buy them, but outside of that, it's kind of like you didn't actually release content that week. And that is almost worse than the issue of people not necessarily wanting to buy cards that suck. So it makes sense that they would want to approach new cards with the mindset of, we want this card to be good. We don't want this card to be busted, but we want this card to be good. And when you aim at a 7, there's kind of a range around that. Sometimes you'll hit a 5 and sometimes you'll hit a 9. And when you hit those 9s, that's when it gets dangerous, because people don't want their 9s to get nerfed. And so I think that a lot of balance is informed by the economy, but I don't think that necessarily, I think they're doing their best within the constraints that they have, and I think they're very talented and awesome guys, and obviously, I'd love to have them back on my show. Shout out to Glenn, shout out to Jason, shout out to Jules. But I do think that they are working in a system that cannot necessarily allow them to aim for perfect balance. I don't think it is possible that they can aim for the game being balanced perfectly, because they need to aim for each of these new cards to be impactful to the metagame. And here's the other thing. The more cards they make, the harder that becomes, because there are so few spaces to mine at this point. SD is great at making games, terrible at business. I'm CL28K, and spending in Pokemon is so much fun. Frustrating your paying customers is a terrible strategy. I am not necessarily gonna disagree with this one. I feel like, again, playing Pokemon Pocket, the gameplay is worse. I'm sorry, it's worse gameplay. Marvel Snap has amazing gameplay. It's very good for a reason. But it has been so compelling to collect cards that I forgot that could be fun. I forgot that collecting cards could be a fun thing instead of a thing that sucked. And in Marvel Snap, it has been a thing that sucked since the beginning. I remember when you'd get one card every, it would scale upwards, right? So, every 12 collection levels, you get a new card, then 24, then 48, then 96. I remember the last of my 48s not being Sarah and me being so devastated. It was Red Skull. And that made me spend more money. They got my ass, but I genuinely forgot it could be fun. And so it is kind of a weird thing to play a game where it's just like, oh my God, I love opening stuff. This is so sick. I actually have to stop myself from engaging with the opening system. That's never happened in Marvel Snap. People who think Pokemon Pocket will be more fairly monetized than Snap are in for a rude awakening. All these games exist to profit off FOMO. Snap is not uniquely greedy or pay to win. Every complaint about Snap will pop up in Pocket once the honeymoon period ends. I think there's a lot of truth to this. Like, you know, new stuff is always more fun. I get it. But I will say that Snap has abandoned several core aspects of card gaming acquisition that I think people are A, used to, and B, have been successful for a reason. And I'm specifically talking about booster packs here. Snap got rid of that for reasons I don't really know. The impression I get of Ben Brode as a designer is that he is a bit of an idealist, and he wants things to be a certain way, and sometimes the things are not that way. Like, sometimes when you have a game this good, you want the game to be the part that people talk about and not the monetization. And I saw an article recently that said, you know, if you're free to play, it'll take 2 years for you to get all of the cards in Pokemon Pocket's first set. That's not good. And people aren't talking about that kind of stuff. But I do think that there is something to the idea that Marvel Snap's monetization might not necessarily be unfair relative to the space, but it is the worst feeling monetization in the card game space. And that's a bad spot to be in. If your system feels like crap, you don't have people having fun. And it could be more generous than the Pokemon system. I'm actually fairly certain when you drill down to it, it might actually just be. But it's not fun, and you can't just, like, dump a couple $100 and get a deck. Like, there are things that people expect out of card games. And thing number one that people expect, booster packs. Thing number two, I'll drop a couple $100, I'll have a good playable deck. Neither of those things happen in Marvel Snap. And I think that there are a lot of ways to fix that, but they do need to fix it. All right, y'all, thank you so much for making it through that video. I hope you enjoyed the speedrun Snap Hot Takes. Thank you so much. As always, I've been KM Best, aka Snappin' A Smith, aka Snap Bayless, aka Snap Right. I don't know. I'm running out of sports pundits. I'll catch you in the next one. I hope you liked it.